we forget that it's a choice for us to put the human connection first. And I don't care what industry you're in, when you do that and when that becomes a part of your personal brand, I think you create a lot of goodwill. You create an exceptional reputation and it comes back to you. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo, and I am thrilled that you're here. Today, I want to talk to you about relationships that work at work. Gosh, I feel really strongly about what's possible for having healthy relationships at work. It's a big part of why I do what I do. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about this and give you some hopefully inspiration about what might be possible for you. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo, and founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and I do all things career transformation. So whether that's one-on-one coaching support, facilitating conversations with teams, or giving keynote talks at your next conference, I'm here to support you in helping people to think differently, get out of their way, and unlock the potential that is within. To learn more, visit CoachTosca.com. That's Coach, TOSCA.com. All right. So let me first share with you the impetus for why I really want to talk to you about this today. If you listened to my last episode, you know that I just got back from doing some keynote talks in California. And a big part of how that opportunity came to be was because of a relationship that I've had and that has been nurtured over the past 20 years. As a former MBA colleague from Michigan State University reached out this past January and said, "Hey, I think you might be a great fit for this conference I'm putting together." Before I flew out there, I was like sitting in so much gratitude for the opportunity, and not just the opportunity, but because my friend Sanjeev, he was such a huge advocate for me. And he did so much to help me feel welcome and just supported before he even stepped foot into the conference. And what I did is I did this post on LinkedIn about it, just sharing how grateful I was for him and sharing a little bit about who he is and what he brings to the world, which is his generosity and his humanity, at the end of the day. And that LinkedIn post went super viral and it was awesome. Like I had like over 8,000 impressions and like 140 comments, like a lot of engagement. And I share that for a couple of reasons. Well, number one, I think authentic content is always king on whatever social media platform, that when we speak from our hearts, it resonates. And so that's the first thing. But I think the second thing about it is that people loved seeing this success story of like relationships that stood the test of time, and to see people that could support each other and then be in this dynamic of this beautiful working relationship and also be friends and have it be so positive. Because I think we've lost an ability to really nurture work relationships. And I am one that believes that we get to have beautiful relationships in all of our spaces. Obviously it takes two to tango, but I think we've been conditioned and we come from this way of thinking, which is we compartmentalize ourselves when we go to work and we shut certain things down and we're there to just get our job done and like forget the niceties, just do the damn things. And I think that's what's making workplace environments more toxic, more harsh, and less enjoyable to be in. I mean, there's a reason why people don't want to go into the office. There's a reason why virtual is so appealing. And it's not just about skipping the commute, and it's not just about convenience. I think it's because we're failing to be in beautiful relationship with our work colleagues, and I don't think it has to be that way. I've had a lot of relationships at work that have transpired into friendships. I've also had a lot of relationships at work that I thought were based on something more than just our transaction at work. And then I left that place and then I found out that's all it was. And that's like loss. And there's definitely grieving to that because you don't necessarily know what that relationship is until you're in a different situation. But I share that because if we want relationships that last beyond the moment or the transaction or the situation, then we have to nurture them and we have to treat them like we would humans in our personal life that we care about. And for some reason, like we show up and work and we think we can just delineate and say, oh, well, I just get to be transactional because we have things to do. This goes back to how I started this conversation of me sharing this kind of post on gratitude. And it's like, how often do we actually show gratitude to those that we work with, to those that we partner with? Like, how often do we really sit back and say, it matters that you're in my life? It's meaningful. You make my life better. You make this environment better. Like, do we really do that? For me, certainly I get into those like doing modes and then I'm writing emails and I get right to the point. But I really try to slow myself down and say, how do I build a relationship in even this small interaction and not make it just be about the transaction? And yes, that takes time and that requires us getting out of the productivity is everything conditioning and mindset that we have. That actually, if we slow down and we build the relationship first and foremost, the transactional part, the doing part will not only become easier, but it'll be more enjoyable. But it requires us to pause and stop and say, what is the relationship that I want to build with this person? Or what might be possible? Or, gosh, what do I even know about this person beyond the tactical things they can get done for me? Do I know who this person is? And I think this is how we become heart centered at work. This is how we put people first as we lead and we create relationships that actually work at work. And yes, there are folks out there that don't feel this way and that maybe won't respond in that way. But that doesn't mean that we can't act and do those things that honor us being in our own integrity and valuing relationships first and foremost, because you don't know what's possible to influence how that other person shows up. And I'm not saying we do it with that intent. It's more we do it with the intent of what we want to create in the relationship and we stay open to what's possible. I think we are so time pressed and so scarcity minded when it comes to time, especially with work because we're all overworked and there's so much to do and we keep getting more and more piled on top of us that we forget that it's a choice for us to put the human connection first. And I don't care what industry you're in, when you do that and when that becomes a part of your personal brand, I think you create a lot of goodwill. You create an exceptional reputation and it comes back to you. And a part of building relationships that work at work is also being able to have difficult conversations and having conversations that feel like conflict and not avoiding those things, but actually looking at those moments as opportunities to build something stronger. I can't tell you how many examples I have of relationships that kind of went down the crapper, pardon my expression, and then there was an opportunity to have a deep conversation, and that led to a strengthening of the relationship. I think those are the moments where a lot of people decide to go around it versus straight at the conversation, and they miss the opportunity to have a stronger connection and perhaps even a bigger ally because you've just built respect with the person that you had a conflict with. And that's not always an easy thing to do. I think about an example in my life where I had a really challenging boss. And, there was a reputation with this boss as being really tough and not being very humane, quite frankly. And part of what I did to build that relationship that could work for me was to stay open to the possibility, to stay open to the knowing that this person was more than just the leadership qualities she exhibited because she didn't have a wide set of tools. Because, we're given very limited examples of what leadership can look like, which is a lot of power over examples. That relationship ended up turning into a budding friendship. But let me tell you, in the moment, it was hard because there was a lot of harshness, and I was responsible for making that relationship work for me. I was responsible for not taking things personally. I was responsible for standing up for myself in those moments that I felt I really needed to. And I was also responsible for letting things go that weren't worth the battle. And these are all parts and parcels of what do we have to do differently to have the kinds of relationships at work that feel just a little bit better. Like I'm not sitting here saying, let's move all the mountains at once. And, that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about coming back to the basics, right? Coming back to gratitude, coming back to the common, thank you for doing that. And not just thank you for doing that, but thank you for doing that. It meant a lot to me because it allowed me to fill in the blank, or it meant a lot to me because you made me feel fill in the blank. Because when we can go deeper with a thank you, it helps the other person really feel seen and valued. And again, I think we operate in this world where it's just go, 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 do, do, do. And we're coming up on summertime, and we're coming up on times that can be a little bit challenging because when go on vacation, other people may be stuck with a little bit more work or have to pick up the slack, or maybe there has to be some grace given that things might take longer, all those dynamics. And what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to get into resentment during this time, because that's what can happen when we're not really focusing on building healthy relationships, because either we're letting our boundaries go, or not being clear in our communication, or we're not being clear in our expectations. And we can solve or prevent a lot of those issues by being very conscious about what we want to have happen in that relationship. I hope this gives you a little bit of hope that you can shift things in the relationships that are struggling right now or that aren't working. And guess what? You don't have to have all the answers on how to exactly do that. I love when people come to me because they're like, well, I have to figure out, X, Y, and Z. And I always come back, well, do you actually have to figure it out? Or can you maybe ask some questions and find out from the other person what would be helpful or what would work? I think sometimes we forget that we get to elicit conversation. We get to be curious. We get to find out what would be helpful, not by figuring it all out ourselves, but by actually inviting the conversation around that. So for example, if you have a relationship that feels very tense right now, you can say, you know what? I feel like things are really tense. It's been building. What is it that I can do differently that might be supportive of having more ease in our relationship? Just as an example, right? Or, you know what? I'm getting a sense that you get frustrated in these meetings. What can I do to help? There's ways to find out what can work without doing all the heavy lifting. But also, I always recommend deep reflection and asking yourself the question about what's going on. How are you showing up? Are you showing up in the way that you want to? Are you showing up as the best version of yourself? Are you showing up triggered and bringing old baggage with you? Or are you showing up being present in the moment and open to what's possible for the future of that relationship or that dynamic? Because those will result in very different outcomes from those conversations or those meetings. I absolutely guarantee it. So I hope that you walk away with some renewed hope about what's possible for those tough relationships. And just to be clear, there are some relationships they're going to be tough. And in the long term, staying in those very difficult toxic relationships are not what I recommend. Those types of relationships, you have to really realize when it's not serving you anymore, when it's causing damage. So there's that, because all you can control is you, and you can't control what the other person does. But it is like magic when you start to look at yourself and how you're showing up. And you'd be surprised about what dynamics can change when you do the shifting yourself first. And I think the other amazing piece about that is when you're doing the shifting first, then you can see what's possible. And then you can kind of address whatever your own inner workings are. And then let's just say that that relationship with the other person doesn't shift because the other person isn't willing or open or whatever. Then at least when you move on to the next role or similar type of relationship dynamic or whatever, at least you're not going to carry the pattern with you of how you're showing up, because you've broken that pattern. And I see and I know for sure that when you break the pattern in whatever relationship you're in, you're not going to have to learn that lesson again, or you're going to figure it out real quick that that's not a relationship that is going to last in the long term. So it serves you either way. Just a slight digression here. Like what I'm sharing with you about this is a big part of how I work with folks where they're usually like in a situation that's uncomfortable or causing a lot of stress or causing them misery. And when we can work through the relationship dynamics to the best of our ability, when we're still in that role, when they're still in that role, then it creates a better situation for the next environment that they go to. It's a great experimenting ground to see what else is possible in this relationship, because you may know that you're not going to stay in it, because you may know I'm ready to leave, but hey, I'm here still anyway. So maybe I can experiment with showing up with open heart. I can show up with not all the baggage that I usually show up with. You picking up what I'm putting down? We get to experiment with new ways of being, with new ways of approaching relationships, and see what's possible with the change. And look, it's summer. People tend to be a little bit more joyful. We're kind of catching them on the upside. So, what a great time to also build on that already higher vibes this time of year. All right, I think I've gotten on the soapbox long enough. Hopefully, you're picking up what I'm putting down. I want you to have amazing relationships at work. And if there's anything I can do to support you in experimenting, you may be saying to yourself, I really don't know what to do differently. Then reach out. You know how to get a hold of me. My information's in the show notes. You can visit me at coachtosca.com and find my contact information there. But I hope you're enjoying the end of June and the start of summer, and wishing you healthy, beautiful relationships at work, much like I expressed in my LinkedIn post with my dear friend Sanjeev. Thank you so much for coming to the lab. So glad you're here, and ciao for now.